The 2019 MotoAmerica schedule is out. JD Beach is headed to Valencia. Rossi almost. Melandri almost. PJ Jacobsen returned to the U.S. All that and more right now on Greg's Garage Pod with Jason and Greg. Well, welcome everyone to the podcast. My name is Greg White, and joining me is Jason Pridmore. What's up, JP?
How we doing there, Greg?
Good. Just to give you a little idea about us, because you might be joining us for the first time. This is our second podcast. I have been in motorcycle racing television broadcast for 21 years. Jason and I have been a team for the MotoAmerica series in the United States, commentating all of those races for television. Jason, you want to tell us about yourself, your favorite topic?
There's not much to talk about. I'm just lucky enough that I've been able to make a career out of riding motorcycles and talking about them and racing them and all those kind of good things. And like you said, Greg, it's been a lot of fun for me to be part of the MotoAmerica telecast with BN Sports the last 3 years and kind of transitioning over into this kind of job. And the podcast thing is something that I think will hopefully be able to get a lot of relevant information to people and a little insight on what's going on in our world.
Yeah, this podcast is really about motorcycle racing in general, specifically talking about road racing, but there's times when we're going to talk about other forms of motorcycle racing just because they're relevant or important, or we've seen some great races. So it's just a conversation about racing in general. And, the season's still going on with road racing, which is always good.
Yeah, we got one round left, so it's getting into that kind of quiet season and some of the silly season stuff that we get the chance to talk about. We'll be able to kind of let people know our thoughts and ideas on where people are going. But we got one more race left in MotoGP, Greg, at Valencia coming up here at the end of the month. And, we got to go back to this last weekend in the Malaysian Grand Prix. I think there was a lot of interesting stories that came out of that. There was, obviously with Rossi leading, I think that was a pretty dominant showing by him for the first 3 quarters of the race, but that one guy just continues to shove his nose in there and show that he is, probably without question the best of all time in my regards as far as like what Marquez is capable of doing. And, he's just won his 5th championship and he wins again in Malaysia.
So just to recap the results for the MotoGP class, it was Marc Marquez who won over Alex Rins 1.898 seconds. Johan Zarco was 3rd, Maverick Vinales 4th, Danny Pedrosa 5th, Andrea Dovizioso in 6th spot, 11.2 seconds back and on down through the field. But the real story was Valentino Rossi led up until about 4.5 laps to go and then chucked it down the road with pressure from Marc Marquez. By the way, Jay, Marc Marquez, his 70th career win, 9th of 2018, 44th in the MotoGP class. And by the way, that was Honda's 24th constructor's title. So really impressive stuff by Marc Marquez, Jay. But what'd you really think about the race overall?
I thought the race was interesting. Last week on our podcast, I said, hey, the Yamahas will be nowhere. I was wrong. The Ducatis are going to be up front. I was wrong. So shows you what I know when it comes to some of this stuff. But I think the Yamaha has gotten a little bit better. Obviously, the last 2 rounds, them winning at Phillip Island, gaining a little bit of momentum and going to Malaysia. I don't think any of us would have predicted that Rossi would lead the first 3 quarters of that race. And it was really interesting watching Marquez trying to close the gap. He was only closing it by about a 10th a lap. The consistency of Rossi is something that I know even Jorge Lorenzo tweeted out about it. The consistency of him, Greg, was incredible. I think tire life on the Yamaha has always been a big problem. We saw that with Melandri coming through the field from 11th after a wet qualifying session, kind of messed up his weekend. And that rear tire was shot. When Rossi fell, if you watch the video really closely, you'll see a very faint small black line, and that was from the front just kind of tucking, and then the rear followed it. And I got to say, when he fell over, I was thinking to myself, how many times do we watch Marquez lose the front and be able to save that? But the one thing is with Marquez is it never looks like, even when the front's gone, the rear's still tracking, and that's the problem that Rossi had when he fell over.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, actually, that you bring up because of that. I mean, we've seen Marquez just tuck the front, save it, tuck the front, save it, sometimes he doesn't, especially during practices when he's really out there, throwing it down. But do you think that's a function of an aging Valentino Rossi, or do you think it's a function of like the setup of the motorcycles themselves, or even the way the motorcycle's designed?
Yeah, I'm not going to say it's the aging part of it. I think that the geometries of the bikes are different, and tire wear is going to be different. The interesting part is that Marquez was trying so hard to catch him sort of 3, 4, 5 laps before that. And they were both really good in certain segments. The first two segments, it looked like Marquez had Rossi covered. The last two segments, Rossi definitely had Marquez covered. So he was only catching him by a tenth. I think that the question I have, Greg, is it's been so long since Rossi's been in a position of control like that and getting pressure applied to him. I can't remember the last time I saw Rossi lead that many laps. You're the stat guy; you probably know that already. But it has to be an interesting dynamic of thinking to himself that he knew Marquez was coming, but only seeing that tenth of a lap being gained. Rossi continued to push, and he just, even to his credit, he said, "I don't know what I did, but it was my mistake." And I'm sure by now they've gone through and looked at the data and things. But Marquez just continued to pile on the pressure and push the pace.
What about Rins? Suzuki's Rins. He finished his second. Man, that dude was ripping at the end of the race. I mean, he just started carving people up.
When I listened to what you just said just now, I think that's probably one of the most impressive things about the race is Alex Rins is just a quiet guy, unassuming guy. I actually took him in our MotoGP pool this year because I like him so much. I like how he rides. But boy, to only be 1.8 seconds off his first Grand Prix win, it's Suzuki's 8th podium of the season. Those podiums have been split in half by himself and his teammate Andrea Iannone. And when you think about what he does, he's kind of silent back there. He'll be running third, fourth, fifth, sixth. But boy, he puts some charges on, and it really shows that the Suzuki is definitely getting better going into the last round and into 2019.
Real quick, Iannone's crash, the way it was called. What do you think actually happened? My view is I think he was leaned over. Marquez lost the front, nearly crashed. And I think Iannone just kind of rolled off the throttle, maybe tucked the front. What do you think?
When you see something like that happen in front of you, it's so reactionary too. There's really two things, Greg. If you've got that throttle in your hand and you've just, at that point, it pretty much looks like he's completely off, but he might have just started to pick up and then just rolled back out of it. Or if he's just touching the front brake lever ever so slightly and you see something like that happen right in front of you, it's an instinct or a reaction. You can see what happened. He literally just tucked the front, and it was a shame because I think that Suzuki of Iannone's would have been up there a lot closer to those guys throughout the race. But the other thing too is Dovizioso was just absent, wasn't he? I mean, not to jump the subject, but to think finish sixth place, quite a way back from
11.2, yeah.
It was really interesting to see how far back the Ducatis were. I know he's won there in the past in the rain, but there was a lot of little things about that race that were very interesting.
Well, I think getting back to Valentino Rossi, there's obviously a question people asking. This is 2018. Valentino Rossi, Jason, has not won a race this year, and it's been a long time since Valentino hasn't won a race. So I did a little dive, little searching on that interweb, right?
Yep.
All right. So let me give you the stats here. So Valentino started his career 1996 on a 125. He won a race then. He won races for 15 straight seasons until he got on that Ducati. And there were 2 years, when he was on the Ducati, he had 3 podiums total, but no wins. Yep. Then he gets back on the Yamaha in 2013. He wins a race, 2 in 14, 4 in 15, 2 in 16, 1 last year. But he's been, winless, Jay. And is Valentino Rossi done? Do you think he's done? And part of the argument is this. If you really go back and look at it, between 96 and 2009, his start to win ratio, his percentage, 45.3% of the time he started a race, he won it. From 2010 to 2018, that's now down to 8.6. Just taking those years, 2010 to 18. So, those first 13 years versus these last 9 seasons, what do you think?
Definitely not done. I can't sit there and say that a guy who still has a chance to finish second in the World Championship this year is done. I think his ability to push is still there. He still enjoys racing. And, honestly, Greg, I think that these bikes, and it's something that you and I have talked about a lot in the past, I think that the bikes have become, I don't want to say easier to ride, but you're definitely seeing guys go deeper into their careers because age-wise. You're seeing even test riders that they're hiring they're not like young kids. They're guys that are a little bit older with experience because the longevity that you can have on these bikes. Is Rossi done? No. I think he proved that this weekend that he's still capable of running up front. That said, if I was to say to you, who else out there would hire Rossi right now? I'm sure you'd get a KTM or an Aprilia team that would do that. He's not interested in going back and doing anything like that. But really, if somebody posed a question in front of you, Greg, and said, well, you can hire Valentino Rossi or you can hire this other young kid that's coming up, I think a lot of people would still take Rossi, not just from the person Valentino Rossi that brings in the droves of crowds, but he's still showing me that he can still obviously ride a motorcycle at a very high level. And to do the lap times he did on the weekend, I think shows that he's still got the drive and the ambition. I think it's really going to be up to Yamaha in 2000 during the off season here to make their package better for both their riders and then fight again for 2019.
Yeah, Lynn Jarvis from the Yamaha factory team has said that they are going to make changes for 2019 across the board, meaning reshuffle personnel around, look at the engineers, the way they communicate with the factory in Japan. So there's a lot of changes there, that maybe Rossi's able to turn it around. Not sure if he's going to be able to win Valencia. I mean, this could be that outlying year that he has towards the end of his career where he doesn't win. And just to your point, when we talk about that points championship, Valentino Rossi sits third. He's only 5 points behind Andrea Dovizioso. And if Dovizioso has the race that he had last weekend where he doesn't show up and Rossi can keep it on two wheels, he definitely has a chance of being second in the championship. However, Vinales, Jason, is only 2 points behind Rossi. He's got 193 points. They're pretty clear. You have Rins and Zarco and Crutchlow and Pedrucci. Those guys all in the 149, 148. It's a nice battle going on for fifth. But you're talking about Dovizioso, Rossi, and Vinales still have that to sort out. And, of course, we know Marquez is long gone in this one. So, what do you think Valentino Rossi's value is as a racer at this point? Do you think it's development? Do you think it's, PR? Do you think it's a bunch of things all wrapped up in one? Or
I still definitely feel like all facets of Valentino Rossi are still firing. And, you look at what he's doing now with his VR46 Academy over there. He's definitely transitioning into another time where he'll be very active when he's done racing. I don't see him honestly going past next year. I think that 2019 will probably be the last year we see him, just with the amount of effort he's putting into his other programs and the underclasses that he has riding right now and the success that they're starting to get. That'll start taking up some of his time. But I definitely have not seen any letdown on his drive and his passion for it. I mean, you can still see when he talks about it and this and that he's still very passionate about being up front. I think that throughout the course of this off season is going to tell us a lot about the motivation. I think if the Yamaha improves, which I think it will, I think that there's some things that they've already started to improve on just looking from the outside. I think that once they start to continue that improvement, and he's got a young teammate who's won this year, that's going to wear on him. So I feel like we haven't seen the last of him, and I wouldn't put it past him to win next year. And I do think he'll finish second in the championship this year.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So Greg, there was some world champions too crowned this last weekend. When you look at the underclasses, the Moto3 championship and the Moto2 championship, Jorge Martin he dominated the season this year in my eyes. Even though Marco Bezzecchi gave him a great run in the championship, that was more due to a little bit of bad luck here and there. But Jorge Martin won the Moto3 World Championship going away at Malaysia in a very, very hard race where he was as far back as 8th and 9th at the beginning of that race. That class to me, Greg, is just so incredible to watch. And I say to our listeners out there, if you don't watch Moto3, you're missing out.
Crazy. You're crazy.
It's just the most insane racing. And
if you watch Moto3, Jay, and you're not like tense while you're watching it, then you're just not invested in the sport. Because I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a battle week in and week out that close, but I mean, I've raced before. Settle down, dummy. Just shut up.
No
but
way.
I'm just saying, if you're in a pack of people like that, and you're talking about in that race, just as one example, from second place down to 11th, so covering 10 riders, that was 1.2 seconds there, and it was closer than that the lap before and closer than that. You got to be like tense. You got to be like your bumhole's got to be puckering it a little bit, right? I mean, how do you focus on the task at hand when you're thinking about not getting whacked around?
Well, there's just so many things that are going through your mind. I would think, the thing about Jorge Martin that's incredible is that his qualifying efforts, if you look at it, I believe he had 8 pole positions this year, or somewhere in that range. He always finds a way to put himself on the front row and out of harm's way. The last 2 rounds at Phillip Island and at Sepang, there was such a huge group of riders drafting and redrafting that all of a sudden Jorge Martin would be leading at Phillip Island and he would be 12th going into turn 1. So there's a constant, you got to keep all your awareness about you. No, Greg, I've never been in any kind of races like these guys in Moto3. I think that some of our friends that are road racers that are also dirt trackers that have gone dirt tracking, I believe that some of those guys have probably been in battles like that because of the miles or half miles or whatever, where you get 10 dirt trackers going at each other. But Moto3, there are literally sometimes 20 guys in the lead group, Magello, Phillip Island, all these different tracks. I think to win that championship, you've got to be incredibly smart. We saw him fall over at Catalunya this year while leading. That was on his own. Bezzecchi as well. Bezzecchi had a very fast KTM. The Hondas were a little bit down this year on power, and the KTMs were a little bit faster. And Bezzecchi used that to his advantage, but he got taken out in 2 out of the last 3 rounds or 2 out of the last 4 rounds. Thailand.
Yeah, it's tough.
And that really hurt his championship hopes because he was really in with a shout as well. I think young men, both are moving up to Moto2 next year, and I think they'll be a force there. And speaking of Moto2, great. Pecco Bagnaia, riding for the VR46 team. You saw Marini win the race there at Malaysia, and that's Rossi's half brother. And on the same team, Pecco Bagnaia wins the championship. And again, if you look at his incredible consistency and his ability to be up in that front row on most weekends to keep himself out of harm's way, both riders that won championships in those underclasses showed an incredible amount of racing savvy this year. And it goes to show, Greg, how important qualifying is to get yourself away from some of the mess that can be created in those first 3 or 4 laps of those 2 very competitive classes.
Yeah, so for Bagnaia, you're talking 8 wins in Moto2 this season. He's got 1 second place finish and 3 thirds, and that's enough to wrap up the championship, obviously with 1 to go. Jorge Martin, Jason, 11 pole positions on the season. 11 of them, and he turned those into 7 wins so far, 1 second place and a third to wrap up his championship, which is just, it's phenomenal riding, I think, in that pack. You know, it's not a series any longer where you can just hang out back and forth, 5th or 6th place, and then just go, I'm going to make my move on the last lap. You've got to be aggressive the entire race long, or else that pack just they're just gone. They check out from you. Then you have no chance of winning. And for Marquez, 9 wins on the season, 4 second place and a third. You know, to touch on Marquez again, Jason, I think really just a mindset change that he's really settled into understanding how to win a championship.
I think when you talk about Marc Marquez, this is the one thing that I find insane. He legitimately, Greg, could have won 6 MotoGP championships in a row. Imagine that. Imagine if he was undefeated from the time he stepped in. And in the year that he lost, when it was the Rossi mess at the end of the year.
The Rossi.
Sorry, Lorenzo Rossi thing. Thank you. Yeah. When you look at that season, had he adopted the same mindset that he eventually did the following season, he literally would have been 6-time world champion. And you know, I don't see him slowing down. I don't see it. He's still beyond driven. He wants to win every single race. The second that he won the championship in Japan, it immediately turned to, well, we still have a manufacturer championship we have to win. We have a team championship we have to win. He finds motivation in ways that most guys might have said, hey, I've won the championship. I want to go win these races, but if I don't win them, I'll get my seconds and thirds or whatever. Not Marc Marquez's style. And he reminds me a lot of Rossi back in the day when Rossi was a little bit younger. It was the same kind of just cutthroat mentality.
One of the things that always impresses me about Marc Marquez, Jason, is the fact that he is able to go straight from Moto2 into MotoGP, and he was an early signing, and he was able to have success right away. Yep. But there's been a lot of early signings and a lot of movement in the MotoGP paddock. What's your take on what's going on there?
Well, I think the early signing thing is incredibly weird to me. You know, when you get these kids, let's just take Joan Mir, for example. Such a huge fan of that kid when he rode Moto3 last year and won the world championship. When he got signed with the Australia Galicia team for this year, alongside with Alex Marquez, I really felt like he was going to do the business. I thought the amount of intelligence he rode with, not unlike Jorge Martin this year in Moto3. What did he have last year, Greg? 11 wins. I think he broke the all-time record last year with the amount of wins that he had in Moto3.
In the Moto3 class, yeah. He had, he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 wins.
10
last
wins.
Year.
Yeah.
An additional 3 podiums after that.
And when you looked at how he did it, he would always put himself in that position, and he was just, what he did was really great. And he signs with a top Moto2 team, moves over to Moto2, And we weren't even 3 races in, and all of a sudden he's getting the announcement. The announcement's coming out that he is stepping up to the factory Suzuki team for 2019. My problem with that is, as a young guy, you've won one world championship, you've gone and signed with a great team in Moto 2. If I was riding for that Moto 2 team, or if I was managing that Moto 2 team, and I saw the way Mir rode this year, I would think to myself, well, it on the outskirts, it almost looked like it hurt the Moto 2 team, meaning the Australia Galicia team, that he signed so early, because Mir did not ride the way I thought he was going to ride this year. He finished second at Phillip Island, and that was really his one really bright spot. I remember at Austin, when you and I were there, he got bumped off the track early and was like 27th place and fought all the way back up to somewhere near the top 5. And I thought, wow, this kid, he really is going to be something. And I think the early signing thing, other than Marquez, I can't think of one person that it's actually gone really well for any of these teams. And now you've kicked out an Iannone on the factory Suzuki team that I feel is more than capable. It looks like him and Rins get along okay together. But they made a very early decision that they were going to get rid of Iannone and bring up Joan Mir. And I wonder now what Suzuki's feeling about that.
What do you think about the Jack Miller experiment? Remember, Jack Miller has been racing now in MotoGP for a couple of years, but he skipped Moto2 altogether. And he was a guy who they were just like, this guy belongs on a MotoGP bike, went straight from Moto3 to MotoGP. Do you think that's paid off?
Well, has it paid off? I would think that Miller's had some little bits of success. He showed some really good rides. Argentina this year was the craziest thing I've ever seen, with him on pole and everybody else 10 rows behind him at the start of that race.
I remember he won in Assen. Yep. The second year, like 2016, I think it was. Like, so he was in Moto 3 and 14, went to MotoGP 15, 16, he won. And at that time, it was like, oh, yeah, this guy's going to be unbelievable. He's starting to get it all sorted out, but not a podium since.
And when you look at where Jack Miller is now, riding for the team he's riding for next year, they've moved Petrucci out of that team to go to the factory Ducati team, which is, again, something else that you and I can discuss, because I think I don't know how Ducati can feel very confident in their whole rider system for next year. I believe that Lorenzo helped push Dovi this year, even going back to this weekend in Malaysia. I don't
help with development of that bike.
Correct. I don't think Lorenzo would have finished 6th place, 12 seconds behind the leaders. I really don't believe that. I believe that Lorenzo would have been closer up front had he been healthy, but who's to say? But now they're going to have Petrucci come in, who's literally limping his way into that ride, in my opinion. And then you've got Bagnaia moving up to MotoGP next year. And I feel that if Bagnaia has an incredible season on that Ducati, he's on a 2-year deal. Petrucci's on a 1-year deal. If Bagnaia has some real promise next year, what happens to Jack Miller if they move Petrucci up to that factory squad? So it's going to be the early signing thing. I think is an interesting dynamic within MotoGP that I think that's definitely going to get some team managers thinking twice about what their decisions are. I would like to see him not be able to have to make a decision until later. You saw Zarco Zarco and that whole Tech 3 team are going to KTM next year. Siren gets signed to go to KTM next year. Zarco is going to be great. Oliveira will be great. He's coming from Moto 2 and going into KTM. But if you watch how Bagnaia and Oliveira have gone into MotoGP, they're going in on a high note. They're going in. They knew where their future's already laid, but they still went in on a very high note.
Yeah, plus I think you have a lot of the exiting, of MotoGP. You have Scott Redding heading over to BSB. You have, Pedrosa retiring, going to KTM test. And you have, Bradley Smith going to be a test rider for Aprilia. There's a lot of movement going on in MotoGP, and it should be an exciting next year.
And, Greg, one more thing you got to add to that is that you look at somebody like Iannone, and he's been around now a little bit, and he is showing real form. Wouldn't you agree that Iannone is definitely a top 5 guy right this second? A podium. He's been on the podium 4 times this year. So you look at Iannone, like he's definitely one of the top 4 or 5 riders in the world right this second. He gets pushed out of a 2-year deal after a year and 3 races. He's pushed out. He's going to an Aprilia now that we both know has not been very competitive. Hopefully they can help get that bike better. Going there as a so-called second rider because Alesia's been there for so long. What happens to an Iannone now? Does he ever get himself back onto one of those big factory bikes or factory teams? Because I think that him being moved out of the Suzuki team really hurts him in his career. And now he's going to a team that is, on a bike that I really don't feel is that competitive. It'll be interesting to see what ends up happening to Iannone from here forward.
MotoGP, man, it's pretty cutthroat.
Yeah. So, anyways, let's get back home. Let's talk about some Moto America, Greg. Uh, we've talked about a lot of things, and we're going to get into some silly season stuff here in a little while. But the 2019
Aha!
calendar has been released by Moto America, and I have to say that we're at the beginning of November right now, and so many years these teams, riders, crew chiefs, everybody sat around on their hands waiting till January and so on to get schedules made. The last 3 years, Moto America has come out with their schedules relatively soon, and I know that this schedule's been out amongst some of the teams, and some of the people within our paddock have had the schedule for a couple of weeks. But kudos to those guys for getting the schedule out early. The first race is going to be, again, I believe, Greg, back at Road Atlanta in April. So we're still some 4.5 months out before our first round. And Moto America's letting everybody know, hey, we're here's the schedule for next year. Here's where we're going to be. Here's what we're going to do. And I think it's great to see it out so soon.
Yeah, let's take a look at it. It's a provisional schedule that we have right now, but there are some significant changes in the way that the schedule is run. Okay, so let's talk about it. So the first scheduled race is April 5th and 7th at Road Atlanta in Braselton, Georgia. Then we go to Circuit of the Americas to be support for the MotoGP class. That's April 12th and 14th. Now, from the press release issued just moments ago, right before we went on, it's going to be Superbike only. So no other support classes for Moto America. So they're the only, that'll be the most amount of races run for the Moto America series for 2019 will be Superbike. Then we go to Virginia International Raceway, May 4th through the 5th. And that's going to be a 2-day event. Now, Jay, the big change is there's going to be 4 2-day events during the calendar for 2019. It's something that Moto America has been thinking about because of the attendance numbers and try to get the schedule to move on. So that'll be very interesting to see how those work out. May 31 through the 2nd, June 2nd, we go to Road America. June 15th through the 16th, a 2-day event at Utah Motorsports Campus. That's got to be East Course only. And the reason they're doing that is because they think it's better for the spectators. Then we go to Mazda Raceway, we go to WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca. That's going to be July 12th through the 14th. That's going to be Moto America only in conjunction with the Monterey Motorcycle Festival. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. We're in Sonoma for a 2-day event, August 10th and 11th. Pittsburgh International Race Complex, August 23rd through the 25th. New Jersey, September 7th and 8th. That's a 2-day event. And we're going to wrap things up September 20th through the 22nd, Barber Motorsports Park. Jason, let's get some comments. Superbike only, Moto GP, maybe East Course, maybe 2-day. What do you want to talk about on this one?
Well, I think that we're kind of a little bit used to the COTA schedule. I think anytime our series intertwines with one of the world championships, it becomes a little bit harder. I know at COTA, they talk a lot about not having enough room in the paddock for more classes. I don't think us going there and running Superbike only is necessarily a bad thing. I'd love to see our 600s get a chance to rip around COTA as well, but I can understand the ideal behind that stuff. When I look at the 2-day events, that's something I definitely think will be a little bit of a change for our teams. I'm twisted both ways on that, and I'm sure that those guys, have sat around the table making the decisions and understanding and talking to the teams. They're trying something new. It'll be hopefully we won't have any big anything that really ruins the schedule as far as any kind of oil spills or anything. I think if a privateer guy maybe has not seen some of the tracks, it might make it a little bit harder for these 2-day weekends. You mentioned something to me there that I find very interesting. The Miller race. I didn't know this. We're going to run the East track only at Miller, which is a lot of fun, by the way. I've actually ridden that East track. Mm-hmm. Better for the spectators. It's going to make it a little bit more condensed. The only problem I have with that as a rider is I just love turns 1, 2, and 3. Miller, I mean, as a rider, I don't have to ride, so it's not going to hurt my feelings too much. Other than turns 1, 2, and 3 are, for me, everything road racing is about. They're fast, they're flowing. We don't have enough of those kind of corners in American road racing. You see those kind of things a lot over in Europe, those kind of tracks. So that hurts me a little bit that we're not going to get to see the full track. But boy, I do understand their reasoning behind that. Number one, and I think the East Coast will be, it'll be a lot of fun for those guys.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. That schedule, I mean, I like it. And I like the fact that Moto America is trying something different. We have done this in the past with AMA Superbike racing. And it's embedded in my brain in 2007, Jason, because that was the time when I got to be a factory rider on a Yoshimura super
Oh,
or
do we
Ben Spies'
keep going
bike.
back to this?
Huh?
Why do we go back to this all the time?
What? Oh, I'm
It
sorry. I'm
just
sorry.
keeps happening.
Anyway, it wasn't necessarily successful back then, but I think that with the way things are working with motorcycle road racing these days, I think it's an interesting thing to try. And the one thing MotoAmerica is not afraid of is trying something. We did this year with entertainment, right? We had we had Tony Hawk show up for one of the races at Road Atlanta. We had bands show up. We had carnival activities at
Yep.
Sonoma. So they're trying a bunch of different things, trying to find a formula that not only works for bikes on track, but it also is going to work for the fans. And that's really the critical component to this whole thing is how do we get those fans to get entertained? How do we create an experience for the fans to get people to come out and watch? Because there's a tremendous amount of value with having fans at the racetrack in terms of activation for sponsors and helping to grow the sport. The TV package is obviously critical. It's very important, but it's also almost equally important to have race fans, show up for this event.
Yeah, and you can't fault them. They're trying everything they can because you said the growth of our sport. We've definitely seen a decline in that. Now it's back on the upswing a little bit. We're getting more talk about MotoAmerica now than we have in previous years, just with some of the silly season things and things that are going on. So I think that they're trying new things. All you can do is try. I like some of it. And I'll tell you right now, there's probably going to be a group of people that it seems like every time we go to New Jersey, Greg, we've had some really bad weather. And 2 days at New Jersey will probably make people a lot happier than 3 if it's pouring rain again, as it has been the last couple times we've been there.
No doubt.
Yeah.
All right, Jay. You mentioned it actually just a couple of sentences ago. Silly season, MotoAmerica's silly season. Let's update some folks what's going on. I mean, the first thing, obviously, the biggest thing is going to be the Yosh ride. Has anything changed? No. Josh Herrin, from the people that I've talked to at Yosh, has been confirmed of testing. I think it's next week. I thought it was going to be before, might be just after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's early this year, but Josh Herrin is going to get a shot at testing the Yoshimura GSXR 1000 Superbike. Valentin DeBees already had his test. What he's done is in the books. So I think they're giving Josh a fair shake, and we'll find out. But there's some other rumors going on. One of them is JD Beach. Okay, JD Beach is going to. It's heavily rumored. 600 program, probably ridiculous racing, and as full of a flat track schedule as he can get. And also the possibility that PJ Jacobsen may return to the U.S. for MotoAmerica. Jason, what are your thoughts on those two rumors?
Well, I think that JD's situation, we've kind of known that for a little bit. I think he had a pretty big contract offer from a dirt track only standpoint. There's a couple interesting things that go along with JD's, for me. Number one, I think staying on a Yamaha with the ridiculous team. Those guys, like we've talked about last week, did such a great job for Hayden Gillum this year, and Hayden and JD are obviously very close. Having those two guys on the same team will be great. I know he's got a Yamaha thing in dirt track as well. He's going to be a busy boy, isn't he? I mean, it's JD. I think seeing where Garrett Gerloff is at the end of 2019 and Cameron Bobier, if any opportunities open up at the factory Yamaha team, they still have JD there. JD's been in the Yamaha family for so long that if he goes and does the ridiculous thing and he goes and does some dirt tracking for Yamaha, the Yamaha door would still be open for a superbike ride, possibly going into 2020. So that's just speculation on my part, obviously, Greg, but I know he's going to be pretty busy. PJ Jacobsen, it would be neat to see a team take PJ over here. I think he's ridden overseas for a long time. He's been on second-rate equipment, especially this year, probably third or fourth-rate equipment. Mm-hmm. And it's a frustrating thing as a racer when you're traveling, you're going all over the world, and you're not on a competitive bike. It's
how do you rate PJ as a rider? I mean, you've been around him for years. We've all been around him for years, but what do you think?
Very, very high. The kid's got incredible feel. I mean, when you think about somebody like PJ, I understand he's gotten some offers, a lot of offers to go dirt tracking as well. So he's another rider that has the ability to go out on the dirt track. And those guys, Greg, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that you and I are going to talk about all kinds of different riding, and we are going to start talking about dirt track because right now there's a lot of dirt trackers making a very healthy, solid living in the American Flat Track Racing Championship. And we're seeing some of our guys now, like the JD Beach. You look at Hayden Gillum, dipped his toes in there this year. You've seen Jake Lewis last year at Daytona. Nick McFadden as well did it. Even talks about James Rispoli possibly going back and doing some dirt track this next season. So, because his team actually folded over in England. So I read this morning, dirt track over here has just gotten healthier and healthier. So these guys are finding it that they can make a living racing a motorbike, and that might be something that we'll see a few more of our guys doing.
All right. One of the things that I found out yesterday in a conversation with JD Beach that I thought was very interesting was JD told me that he is heading over to Valencia for the final round of the MotoGP season. And the reason he's doing that is because he's got interest for 2020 in going to either World Superbike or Moto2. What do you think about JD's move to get on an airplane and head on over to where the jobs are?
Well, I think that if the guys that we have here in America, I really feel that right this second, if you had to pluck two guys away from our championship that are capable of going over to Europe and making a big impression, number one, Cameron Beaubier, I think deserves to be over there. So he would be the first guy, and JD for sure. And I always think about JD in Moto2, especially when I watch the races, guys backing it in. That was kind of the way JD has ridden for so long, and he's really tried to change that riding style. But I think it would fit in perfectly over there. I think these guys need to take
Not
a
going to
little
work
bit
for him if he's on that Yamaha doing dirt track, though, huh?
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's going to be sideways a lot this year. But the thing is, I think, Greg, is that it's good to have management groups and that kind of thing. But I still believe that you're in a day and an age right now where things have changed a lot over the last 10 years, and picking up the phone yourself or going and showing your face in front of people is still a great way to get yourself out there and get your name out there and your personality out there. JD's got such a great demeanor about him and such a great personality that just the fact that he's going to Valencia, showing his face, maybe he's got some thoughts and ideas, like you said, about some Moto2 possibilities in the future. So I think it's great that he's jumping on a plane, go over there, see what the feel's like in that paddock, see if he can meet with some teams, some people, and maybe get an opportunity to do a wild card or two going into 2019. Because it doesn't sound like, Greg, he's going to be under like a really strict Yamaha contract like he had maybe been in the past, and it might afford him some opportunities to branch out and try some other things.
Yeah, I don't think Yamaha's really got the budget at this point to try to lock JD down no matter what he does.
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And I'm a huge JD fan. As with most of the guys in our paddock, I say that about a lot of guys, but I just think we have a good group of kids, good group of guys in our paddock that deserve shots, and hopefully they'll start to get that. One of the things that you and I can't stop talking about is attack. When we start talking about Richard Stamboli, his name is on the mind of people over in Europe, in the sense that might be a way for them to get over here and race. And I'm talking about riders, Greg, that don't have jobs. We talked World Superbike here a little bit ago. Listen to this. We got Eugene Lavity, we got Salvadori, Xavi Forez, Loris Baz, Jake Gagne, Marco Melandri, and Jordi Torres, all that rode World Superbike this year. And all of them right now are currently don't have a contract. Now, I know that Melandri's been linked with the Attack Yamaha team for some while. I also know that there's going to be a second Yamaha team starting up over in Europe that I believe Melandri's going to. What do you know about that?
Yeah. Well, I talked to Richard Stamboli yesterday from Attack, and there is that motorcycle that Josh Herron took to some wins available. Josh Herron, I think, is kind of hedging his bets possibly towards the Yoshimura factory ride. Richard Stamboli wants to come racing, and heard Marco was out of a job at Ducati, and picked up the phone and started making some calls. Next thing you know, they're connected. And it looked like Marco really wanted to come over here. I think you know more about that, but there was a promise, there were some things said, and it sounded like he was coming over, but management stepped in, and next thing you know, this second factory Yamaha, team that's available in Europe in World Superbike, they ended up snatching him up, and he stays. So almost Marco Melandri here in the United States, at least for the time being, for MotoAmerica. It doesn't mean that he'll never show up, but at this point in time, it sounds like he's going to be staying in World Superbike. What do you think about that whole situation, Jay?
I think the knock that our series gets is it seems like we get all the MotoGP guys that, or World Superbike guys that couldn't perform over there anymore, and this and that. I have no doubt in my mind that you take a Tony Elias or even Cameron, like we talked about, who hasn't been over there, but they'd be more than competitive over there with the right equipment and the right team and the right bike. I feel like a lot of guys look over here and they see Yosh and they see Yamaha, and Richard Stamboli has so much respect that people have seen. I mean, the guy built a MotoGP bike. He has so much ability to put a top-tiered privateer bike, if you will, underneath a rider that people realize they can come over here and win on a Stamboli attack.
Yeah, actually, yeah, Jay. So you bring up that good point. Okay, think about this. Think about how many years you've been in the paddock. I mean, you've been around since 1940, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But
yeah, a little before that. But yeah, thanks.
There's always been the talk of factory involvement and privateer teams can't compete, trying to catch up. Michael Jordan, who you rode for, who was in the paddock, I don't even know how long, 7 years or something.
Yeah.
You know, when Daytona Motorsports Group bought that, it was like, okay, they're going to make rules changes. We're going to be competitive. We're going to go racing. But I think really on a consistent basis, Richard Stamboli and that attack superbike has been, with the rules package that we have and the ability for him to do things, has really been the standout superbike of the 21 years I've been in the paddock that says that a privateer team can actually compete. And with Josh Herrin on that motorcycle and what they were able to accomplish, that has bled over to Europe. And Attack has really been able to help put MotoAmerica as a justifiable racing series, you know, again, back on the map. And I think that it's pretty incredible. And it also shows people, hey, wait a second, there's a person out there and a team out there that can compete with factories, because it's not really happening in World Superbike at all.
No. And Greg, I was so fortunate to ride for him, his team, back in the day. And one thing I really recognized about Richard is it's his life. Like, Richard doesn't have hobbies, I don't think. I think if you go up to Richard and go, hey, what's your hobby? He'll look at you with that little grin and just laugh, like, yeah, hobby, whatever. You know, he brings this stuff. And I mean, but he works hard and he's always thinking outside the box. And even back when I started with Attack in 2001, and we decided to go try to ride some Superbike in 2003, I was amazed at how hard it seemed. Like every race we went to, he was trying something or we were working on something. And back then when racing was, you know, there was 10, 14 factory riders, we were able to, with the package he put underneath me, get me up on the podium a few times in Superbike. And he's never let up on that. He's not interested in the super sports and the super stock categories as much because he can't fiddle with things. He's a hard worker that likes to sit at work, design, engineer things, very bright. And I think that people are recognizing that. And I think any of those 7 riders that I mentioned would be potential guys that could come over here and ride if like a Herrin wasn't there, if Josh moved on to something else. I think there's 7 guys if they could do it. But Greg, it all revolves around one thing, doesn't it? It's the money. It's being able to afford to go racing, and any of those 7 guys could come over here and win on an attack bike. I say attack bike because he could really Richard could build any bike and make it competitive.
But for him, Attack, having the Yamaha, he sells a lot of Yamaha parts, he told me. And by the way, I hate to say this on the side note, I really do. But when we were talking about the cost of going racing, he was saying, look, he's got it covered. A lot of that cost of going covered. It was a cheap year for him because he's had his trailer, you know, the transporter for a long time, including a desk that has a dent in it or a chip out of it from a time when you threw a helmet inside the actual trailer. He's had that trailer since he knew you. But I will say this is the part I hate to say.
I don't really remember that.
He did say all time, Jason, that you are one of his favorite racers of all time. Now I'm going to leave it at that because since we are on the topic of World Superbike, let's talk about Honda's involvement in World Superbike and something that came out in EICMA's show just a couple of days ago, that the Tenkata team losing Honda and going to Althea, Jason, and who they ended up signing. There's more HRC involvement, which is really good. It's something Nicky Hayden and I talked about when Nick was at that team. Milwaukee Engineering is involved with that program. I mean, there's a lot of hype and positivity going on with Honda right now, but were you shocked? That's the big thing. What are you shocked about with this big move from Honda?
What I'm shocked about is it took this long for Honda to have the mediocre results that they've had for so many years in World Superbike to finally make a move and try to do something different, because, you know, it just seemed like they've been punched in the face for the last 3-4 years in Superbike. And how I remember Honda and HRC is winning and being up front all the time. And I've ridden this CBR 1000 in stock trim. And I'm saying stock trim, nothing like what these guys are racing in. And the Honda CBR 1000 is a great motorcycle. It's a fun bike to ride. Chassis-wise, it's incredible.
right?
everything about it I loved. I
Yeah,
literally
me
did a
too.
test. I did a test last year, or maybe a year and a half ago, and I rode all 4 of the Japanese bikes, and I couldn't believe how good the Honda was. I actually came into the guys that were there and I said, okay, what have we done to this bike overseas that's made it, to where you can't ride it? And some of the things that we've talked about. I think having Milwaukee involved, having HRC involved, the Altea connection is interesting to me, considering they had one bike, one rider team this year. So this is something that's obviously been in the works over there. And when we saw this break a few days ago, I just kind of thought to myself, well, Honda's finally had it. They want to start getting more of a Japanese influence involved with this team. And
Why did you think that though?
well, because I just think that they've just been the last few years has been such a struggle for them. Even when Nick was riding, and even before that, I mean, the Honda had won some races up until probably 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, more consistently when Johnny Ray was
Johnny
on it.
Ray, yeah, yeah.
And even when Michael Vandermark was on that Honda, he made it look good at some races, but the Honda has not been dominant at all in years and years and years in World Superbike. And I think the connection with Milwaukee is a strong foundation that they've had for years over there. If you go to the Suzuka 8-hour ever, you see Midori and the whole Milwaukee team is always at the forefront at that race.
Midori Moriwaki, of course, the daughter of the owner,
yep.
who's an absolute stud, by the way. She is just
great.
Knows racing, knows the business. Yeah, she came over here and did a little, internship with the Team Hammer way back in, let's see, I want to say it was 95 or 96-ish, something like that, where she was over here. So well familiar with her. But Jay, so you bring up, so were you surprised that Ryuichi Kiyanari gets the ride?
I think that's the big question on a lot of people's brains. And I think that is a little bit of the Japanese connection that's there. He's racing for them currently in the Japanese Superbike Championship. But when you look at Kiyo in the last 8 or 9 years, really, he's really been non-existent in the sense that racing for championships. Now, we're talking about a guy that's won 3 British Superbike Championships. The last time I remember him riding over there, I think he did a wild card. It was either this year or last year. I think it was this year he did a wild card for, I think Dan Linfoot had been injured. He had gone over there and done a round. But he rode for Build Base BMW as well, got them into the showdown and then was injured and couldn't compete for the rest of that championship or compete in the showdown, let's say, for Build Base. He's 36 years old. He hasn't been in his World Superbike since 2008, 2009. And if I'm any one of those 7 other riders that I mentioned earlier, I'm sitting there scratching my head thinking, well, that seems like an interesting choice at this point. I like the story behind it. I would love nothing better than to see Kiyo run up front. But it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Like I said, 36 years old. But again, he's riding for Milwaukee right now. So that's kind of their way of getting him. They've been on Bridgestones, I believe, over there. Now he's going to get back to the Pirellis. They're going to be seeing if some of the stuff that they've done to their motorbike over in Japan in that championship leads itself over.
What's interesting to me is this HRC connection, because if you remember when Nicky Hayden was hired to race in the World Superbike team for Honda, the very first press release that came out, the bike and his leathers were all in HRC livery. They have their special HRC paint job. But by the time the season started and we got closer after testing, you saw it in the, Fireblade CBR 1000RR livery from Europe, that kind of paint job. And the HRC support kind of got pulled away from that program because there's people that really like Nick in HRC, from what I've heard from Nicky, when he was alive, and then people that kind of didn't like Nick. And so the fact that HRC is now saying, okay, great, World Superbike is a viable option for us. It's a place where we can help develop motorcycles, is a good sign for the sport in general, because I think a lot of people have been kind of, poo-pooing World Superbike and saying, oh, it's not really, that well watched or that well attended. But, when you really look at the racing itself, take Johnny Ray out of the equation and what he's able to do, his domination of it and how amazing he is, there's actually some really good races on the racetrack. So
there's no question, Greg. And, when you talk about the Tenkate team that Honda has had, Tenkate's been there for so long. They're a huge dealer in Holland, huge motorcycle. They sell so many Hondas there. It's going to be interesting to see because, we've also heard that there's a possibility of them going to Suzuki. I don't think that we don't want to lose Tenkate in the paddock, but I I would definitely think that Tenkate as a team, and basically as a team that's been in World Superbike for as long as they have, they're probably looking for a change too. And I think that you've got that Suzuki, and you've got Greg, you've got there's a new Aprilia out. I still think that there's going to be some announcements for possible riders on Suzuki's and Aprilia's moving forward. So it's going to be interesting to watch all that and see. One thing that we're not going to see next year, Greg, which is it's kind of sad, not going to lie, but one of the things we're not going to see is we're not going to see any of these World Superbike teams over here in America. And along with that calendar that we talked about earlier, we know Laguna Seca is on the schedule, but World Superbike will not be coming back, and it is a shame because if we do get
2019, at least for yeah,
yes, yeah, and if we see some new rides and some new manufacturers get involved with World Superbike, they're going through a little bit of change right now too. I think that they've tried some things this year. I hate the fact that they're limiting RPMs and they're detuning these motorcycles. I mean, as a racer and as a fan, I want to see the most badass bikes out there with the greatest riders on them, and they're unleashed a little bit. And I don't like that so much because they're trying to make the competition closer because they got a guy dominating, and I understand, but it didn't really work. And the whole reverse grid thing to me it's not real racing to me. It's gimmicky stuff, and I'm not very stoked on that either. But the fact that now they're going to go to 3 Superbike races in a weekend, I just wonder if that affected the decision to come here to America, because I haven't talked to Chuck or Wayne at all about this, but really when we ride in our series here, and anytime that we have a MotoGP or a World Superbike weekend, our schedule gets so affected by it, and it's really very difficult. All of our riders and our teams that are used to certain set schedules, it really gets thrown into the wind when you get involved with Dorna and World Superbike and MotoGP.
Yeah, there's been some conspiracy theorists out there that are saying, well, World Superbike isn't well attended, and that's the reason, blah, blah, blah. But that's not entirely true. I have the spectator numbers for World Superbike for 2018, and looking at those 13 rounds, Laguna Seca was it was the 4th highest attended race, and it did have some nominal growth. Let's put it that way. It was a couple hundred people more than it was in 2017. So didn't really move the needle much, but so it's not attendance, 64,425 listed for the total 3-day event for 2018. So it's not it. I just, without you talking to Chuck and Wayne about this, and I haven't really reached out to my contacts at World Superbike to find out why they're not coming, or actually WeatherTech, Raceway, Laguna Seca either, which we have contacts. But we'll get to the bottom of it eventually and find out what's going on. And I thought that the press release about it, excuse me, a very telling sign that it's just a 1-year deal, because they even mentioned that there's a possibility World Superbike could come back in 2020. How good is WeatherTech, Raceway, Laguna Seca, Jason? And what do you think the gauge is for those World Superbike riders that are going to miss coming to the United States?
Well, I know that's a favorite of all the riders that come over from overseas. And, I think our series can stand on its own, no problem. It's great to hear that we were the 4th highest attended World Superbike race. So it shows that our fans and that Laguna that our fans are spectacular, and that Laguna is still a very big destination place. The thing that allures so many fans to World Superbike is the being able to get so close to the riders. That's one thing I do love about what World Superbike has done this year with their paddock shows. They've moved the podium closer so the fans can be involved with the celebrations a little bit more. They've done a lot of really great things on that level of stuff. And I know that right now they're just in a spot where they've got such a dominant champion. Those guys are going to be sorely missed at Laguna Seca, because it is probably the best track on our calendar. I think I might like Road America a little bit more for me, but Laguna's top 2, top 3 in our championship. So I think it's great that we're going back as a series, as MotoAmerica, because we can definitely do a standalone event there, and it's going to give chances for us to see a couple 300 races, 2 600 races now, which we didn't get to see last year because we really only had time for one of them. And I'd be really interested to talking to the guys at MotoAmerica about, was this a kind of a decision not only between WeatherTech, Laguna Seca, and World Superbike, but maybe we just kind of felt like, hey, if those guys come back over here, there's just not a lot of room for us to move around as far as our schedule goes.
Yeah, I would think some financial decisions as well. I mean, I'm looking forward to that's going to be July 12th through the 14th, the Monterey Motorcycle Festival. So it's going to be an entire event that's all kind of revolves around MotoAmerica and MotoAmerica racing. So it's going to be pretty exciting to see.
Yep.
All right. Well,
And
Jason, oh,
real
go ahead.
quick,
Another thing.
I think the last thing is when we talk about this World Superbike stuff is, with all the new bikes that are definitely, some of the stuff that you and I have already discussed, they might have a bigger grid than we're thinking of next year. There might be more rides still to come over the next 5 to 6 weeks. We're going to be hearing a lot of things. I know Eugene Laverty was in Sepang, still sitting with the Aprilia team over there. So, maybe you're going to start to see that. And it's a little bit of a regroup year, I think, next year for World Superbike with some of the changes that they're making to their series. And, and maybe it'll be a great time for them to rebound and be back at Laguna in 2020. So, yeah, I think World Superbike will definitely be back. We're just going to skip them for a year.
All right. So any final thoughts? I mean, obviously, social media, how people reach out, but any final thoughts for this particular podcast?
I think that just seeing it's going to be interesting. I followed BSB quite a bit, and I'm at the racetrack all the time. So just being able to understand kind of the things that are going on within all these different series, I think that there could be some interesting things coming out over the next 3 weeks, and we'll look forward to talking about them.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very exciting season. So make sure you check out Jason and I on all of our social media. We're kind of scattered around, like, Pridmore 43, JP 4, I don't know. But you can find us on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. If you have any questions for us, anything that you would like for us to cover on this podcast, we'd be happy to. Eventually, down the road, as we get this thing really rolling, we're going to have some guests in. We've been very fortunate to get calls from people who already want to be a guest on the podcast. So we'll definitely be featuring not only riders from around the world, but also industry folks and talk about the health of motorcycle racing and racing in general in the U.S. So thanks so much for joining us here on the Greg's Garage Pod with Jason and Greg. We'll see you. Well, we actually won't see you, but you'll hear us next time. And don't forget, subscribe to whatever as we distribute this thing around, because you'll get notifications every time we post up a new one. Thanks for listening. Later.